The corridors of St. Aldwyn's private hospital were unnervingly still as Eliza Hart made her way through the softly lit hallways, the scent of antiseptic and polished wood wafting around her. It was just past dusk, and while the rest of the world outside bristled with the bustle of London life, inside these walls time seemed to slow, especially on the top floor where the most enigmatic patient in the hospital lay in a silent, suspended state. Eliza had been a nurse here for nearly 2 years, capable, quiet, known for her tenderness even in the face of hopeless cases. But today felt different. She had been called unexpectedly to the office of Dr. Whitaker, the hospital's stern head of neurology. Her stomach fluttered with uncertainty as she knocked on the heavy office door. "Come in," came the clipped voice. Inside, Dr. Whitaker stood facing the window, his silhouette bathed in the orange hue of the setting sun. "Eliza," he said, turning to face her, his tone unusually solemn, "we've a patient who requires dedicated care. But I'll warn you now, this job isn't for the faint-hearted." His gaze drifted toward a thick file on the desk. "Sebastian Rowe," he said, pushing the folder toward her. The name jolted her. She knew it. Who didn't? Sebastian Rowe, the youngest tech mogul in the UK, a self-made billionaire whose car crash last year had left him comatose and clinging to life. He'd vanished from headlines after the accident, but now here he was, still alive, still silent, and still completely alone. His family had distanced themselves. Staff treated him like a forgotten fixture. But Dr. Whitaker believed Eliza might be the one who wouldn't. He needs someone who won't just clean him and tick boxes. He needs someone to care, truly care. She didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the photo in the file. Sebastian's face, once so full of power, now pale and still. Despite the daunting weight of what lay ahead, something in her chest stirred. She nodded. "I'll do it." That night, her first shift began in Sebastian's private suite, more luxury penthouse than hospital room. The moment she laid eyes on him, machines keeping him breathing, his expression calm as if in a dream, something shifted inside her. She reached out, beginning to bathe him as instructed. But the moment her hand brushed his skin, a chill ran through her. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if he could feel her there. The silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt like it was listening, and so began a quiet routine that would change both their lives in ways no one could have predicted. Each day, Eliza Hart returned to Sebastian Rowe's room with an unspoken promise, one that lingered not in words but in her steady presence. She bathed him, spoke to him, and gently teased him as though he were just asleep and would wake at any moment. At first, it was purely clinical, a task, a duty, but soon it became more. She began to share fragments of her life with him. "You wouldn't last a day with hospital food," she'd mutter with a smirk, wiping down his arms. "I've seen better meals in motorway cafes." Her stories were simple. Tales of her awkward childhood in Kent, her mother's long illness, her own dream of becoming a nurse sparked by watching kind strangers take care of the woman she loved most. And somehow, in the sterile quiet of that room, she felt less alone. Sebastian, of course, remained unmoving. His body was still, his eyes shut, his face eerily peaceful, until the day something shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable. The faintest twitch of his finger beneath her touch. Eliza froze, staring at his hand as if it had shouted at her. Then it was gone. She laughed it off at first, shaking her head. "You're imagining things, Hart," she whispered. But the next day, as she adjusted his pillow, his fingers brushed hers, gently, as though he were testing reality itself. This time she didn't dismiss it. Her heart pounded, the air around her electric with possibility. "Sebastian?" she whispered, hope surging like a tide. Silence. She reported it to Dr. Whitaker, her voice trembling with cautious hope. He listened politely, then offered a clinical explanation: muscle spasms, reflexes. "Don't get too invested," he warned. "These things happen." But Eliza knew what she'd felt. There had been intention in his movement, awareness. Something was shifting behind those closed eyes, and the tests confirmed it. Subtle but undeniable increases in brain activity, stronger neurological responses, the kind of changes doctors prayed for but rarely saw. Dr. Whitaker was measured in his optimism, but Eliza let herself believe. She stayed longer with him now, sometimes arriving early or staying well after her shift ended. She spoke to him as if he were a friend, a brother, someone she'd known her entire life. She laughed, she vented, she whispered her fears to him late at night when no one else was around. And always she listened for the smallest change. Then one morning, as she was wiping his wrist with a warm cloth, Sebastian's fingers curled tightly around her hand. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Eliza's breath hitched, her eyes flying to his face just as his eyelids began to flutter. And then impossibly, they opened. Those piercing blue eyes, confused, dazed, vulnerable, stared straight into hers. Eliza froze. "Sebastian?" she whispered. He opened his mouth, his voice barely audible, just a rasp of sound, but it was real. "Where am I?" She was shaking as she called for the emergency team. The room flooded with doctors and nurses, but for Eliza, everything else melted away, because Sebastian's eyes were still on her, as if he recognized her, not from memory but from presence, from the weeks of stories, the warm cloths, the soft humming as she cleaned the room, from her voice in the quiet, calling him back from the darkness. He didn't remember her name, he didn't know where he was or why, but something deep within him did know her. And as he slowly began to recover, as his muscles regained strength and his words returned with difficulty, it was Eliza he trusted. Eliza who coaxed him forward step by step. She never treated him like a billionaire or a miracle patient. She treated him like a man who had been lost and was now learning to live again. And so, quietly, day by day, the bond between them deepened. Not out of obligation or gratitude, but something raw and honest, something rare, something that neither of them, once so alone in their separate silences, had ever expected. Sebastian's awakening was hailed as a miracle by the hospital staff, a medical anomaly wrapped in cautious optimism. But while the doctors rushed to test his responses and monitor his neurological progress, Eliza Hart could sense something else entirely, something unspoken yet deeply unsettling. His memories were fragmented, hovering just beyond reach, and every attempt to recall the accident only ended in mounting frustration. There were headlights, a road, rain, Sebastian would mutter, brows furrowed, voice taut with strain. Eliza listened carefully, piecing together the fragments as if assembling a puzzle no one else could see. Then came the night when she decided to revisit the archived accident report, hoping for clarity, and stumbled upon the chilling truth. The brakes on Sebastian's car hadn't simply failed. They had been tampered with. The word leapt from the page like a scream. Tampered. This hadn't been a tragic accident, it had been sabotage. Someone wanted him dead. Eliza's blood ran cold. She returned to Sebastian's room the next morning, her eyes searching his for signs that maybe, somehow, he already suspected. "I remember more now," he said before she could speak. "Someone was watching, standing by the road. They didn't help, just watched as I crashed." Her heart sank. The memory had returned, not just the fear or the confusion, but the chilling realization of betrayal. Over the next few days, Eliza and Sebastian quietly began digging through his company's financial records, emails, internal reports. Hidden within them was the smoking gun, a suspicious transaction to a name that matched a known criminal linked to vehicular sabotage. The sender? Nathan Rowe, Sebastian's half-brother. The same man who had always resented Sebastian's position, the fortune he inherited, the admiration he commanded. The betrayal cut deep. Sebastian stared at the proof, hollow-eyed. "He tried to kill me," he whispered. "My own brother." But this time he wasn't alone. Eliza reached for his hand, her grip steady and warm. "Then we make sure he doesn't get away with it." What followed was a calculated plan to confront Nathan, with evidence, with strength, and with the quiet power of survival. Sebastian had once lived in a world ruled by money and ambition. Now he faced a reality shaped by trust, betrayal, and the fierce loyalty of one woman who had stood by him through silence, suspicion, and storm. And as they moved forward, together, they knew one truth for certain. This was no longer about revenge. It was about reclaiming life. Sebastian's recovery wasn't just about muscle and memory. It was about rebuilding a life that had been shattered from the inside out. The man who once commanded boardrooms and headlines was now learning to walk again, one labored step at a time. And through it all, Eliza was by his side. From the first painful session in the physiotherapy ward to the late-night walks in the hospital garden, she never wavered. When Sebastian faltered, cursing his weakened body, it was Eliza who steadied him, who reminded him that strength wasn't measured in power or profit, but in resilience. "You've already survived the worst," she whispered once, as he clutched the parallel bars with trembling hands. "Now prove to yourself you're still here." It was in those quiet, in-between moments, when the world stopped demanding and simply let them breathe, that their connection deepened. Eliza had never seen herself as extraordinary. She was just a nurse from a working-class town who'd chosen compassion over comfort. But to Sebastian, she became the anchor he never knew he needed. She didn't care about his past fortune or his fractured legacy. She saw the man beneath the trauma, the vulnerability behind the once impenetrable facade, and the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the unspoken pull between them. One night, after a grueling round of therapy, Eliza led him outside into the garden. The air was crisp, stars blinking above as if watching their every step. "You need fresh air," she said with a smile, but when her hand brushed against his, it lingered just a second too long. He looked at her then, not with confusion but with clarity. Something was shifting, not just in his body, but in his heart. They stopped near a stone bench, the hospital lights casting long shadows across the grass. Sebastian turned to her, voice quiet but firm. "I may not remember who I was, but I know what I feel when I'm with you." Eliza's breath caught. No declarations, no grand speeches, just truth, raw and trembling. In that moment, something miraculous happened again, not of medicine or memory, but of emotion. Two people, broken in their own ways, found something worth holding on to. Not the past, not even certainty, just each other. And somehow, that was enough. The memory returned to Sebastian like a storm breaking over still water, sudden, jarring, undeniable. One moment he was lost in the haze of recovery, the next he was gripped by a vivid flash, rain pelting the windscreen, tires skidding across wet asphalt, a shadowy figure watching from the roadside as his brakes failed. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. His accident hadn't been an accident at all. Someone had tried to kill him, and worst of all, he had no idea who or why. Eliza noticed the change in him immediately. He was no longer just struggling with his physical limitations. He was haunted, alert in a way he hadn't been before. When he finally told her what he remembered, her heart sank. She'd seen the accident reports, combed through the reconstruction notes. She too had suspected something more sinister, but hearing it from him made it real. Together they began to piece the puzzle back together. Company files, personal correspondences, hidden transactions, all evidence that pointed to one undeniable truth. Someone within Sebastian's circle had orchestrated the crash. And then they found it. A single transaction buried beneath layers of forged approvals. A large payment wired days before the crash, sent to a name Eliza recognized from a criminal file. A known fixer with ties to arranged accidents. The sender? Nicholas Hawthorne, Sebastian's half-brother. The betrayal struck hard. Nicholas had always envied Sebastian's success, always lived in his shadow, but neither of them had imagined he would go this far. "I trusted him," Sebastian muttered, staring down at the transfer records, his jaw clenched. "He wanted everything I had, and was willing to kill me for it." Eliza placed a hand on his, steadying his shaking fingers. "But you survived, and now we make sure he doesn't get away with it." In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming power, Sebastian's life, his voice, and the truth that had nearly been buried with him. With Eliza beside him, no longer just his nurse but his partner in uncovering the darkness, Sebastian vowed to expose everything, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been used and discarded in pursuit of greed. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. And for the first time in months, Sebastian felt ready to walk it. The confrontation with Nicholas had left Sebastian feeling raw, yet strangely lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted from his chest. The man who had once been his brother, his blood, had looked him in the eye and admitted it. The sabotage, the betrayal, the calculated cruelty. But what Nicholas hadn't anticipated, what he could never understand, was that Sebastian hadn't come through this alone. He had Eliza, and it wasn't just her care that had brought him back to life. It was her presence, her belief in him, her refusal to give up even when the world had turned its back. That evening, back at the Carter estate, no longer a cold monument to power, but now a place where something new could begin, Sebastian had a quiet dinner prepared. Nothing ostentatious, no media, no guests. Just candlelight, soft music, and Eliza in a simple navy dress, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She walked into the dining room and froze, her eyes scanning the elegantly set table. "What is all this?" she asked, surprised. Sebastian smiled, stepping forward with his hand tucked nervously into his pocket. "Dinner," he said simply, "for the woman who saved my life." Eliza softened, visibly touched, but it was the way he looked at her, like she was the first person he'd truly seen in years, that stole her breath. As they sat and talked, laughter mingling with the warm evening air, Sebastian grew quiet. He reached across the table, gently brushing his fingers over hers. "Do you know how many people walked away from me while I was in that bed?" he asked, voice low. "But you stayed." Eliza tried to speak, but her throat caught. "I had everything before the crash, money, status, a legacy, but none of it meant anything until you. You gave me something I never had before. Someone who sees me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Eliza Taylor, will you marry me?" She blinked, stunned, then nodded through tears. "Yes, yes." In that moment, beneath the golden chandelier and years of heartbreak, two souls who had faced life's darkest storms found something rare and extraordinary: love, reborn from ruin. The days following Sebastian's heartfelt proposal to Eliza passed in a golden blur of anticipation and healing. The Carter estate, once cold and imposing, now buzzed with gentle excitement. For the first time in years, it was no longer a fortress guarding pain, but a place preparing to celebrate love. As the wedding day approached, Eliza found herself walking through the estate gardens, now transformed with twinkling lights, white roses, and soft orchestral music drifting on the breeze. She wore a simple, elegant gown, her heart pounding as she stepped toward the grand entrance, where everything was about to change. Sebastian stood at the altar beneath an arch of fresh lilies, dressed in a classic black suit, his blue eyes never leaving her. When Eliza met his gaze, all nerves faded. Every moment of their journey, his coma, the betrayal, the redemption, and the love that quietly bloomed between hospital sheets and hushed confessions, culminated in this one sacred promise. They exchanged vows not just with words, but with the weight of shared experience. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer from their small circle of close friends and staff filled the air. But it was Sebastian's kiss, gentle, fierce, unshakable, that sealed their future. For Eliza, the woman who had once been just a quiet nurse in a lonely hospital room, this was more than marriage. It was belonging. It was recognition. It was love in its purest, most transformative form. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber hue across the garden, Sebastian and Eliza slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand down a quiet stone path. "I used to think I had everything," Sebastian murmured, looking up at the stars. "But I was hollow inside. You showed me what it means to truly live." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "And you showed me that love doesn't care where we come from, only where we choose to go together." In that quiet, starlit moment, they knew they had not only survived, but built something beautiful from the ashes. Their love, forged through trials, stood stronger than wealth or legacy. It was real, and it was forever. As the laughter of their wedding night faded into soft echoes and the glow of candlelight dimmed, Sebastian and Eliza found themselves standing on the stone balcony of the Carter estate, wrapped in silence and stars. Everything had changed, yet somehow they both felt more like themselves than ever before. No longer a nurse tending to a silent man in a coma, Eliza was now his wife, his partner, the person he trusted more than anyone. And Sebastian, once a cold, unreachable billionaire, was now simply a man in love, finally freed from the shadow of betrayal and pain. Their story had been nothing short of extraordinary, But it wasn't the wealth or the mystery that made it unforgettable. It was the way Eliza never gave up on a man who couldn't speak or move. It was the way Sebastian reached for her hand in the dark without knowing why, and the way love bloomed in that quiet space between the impossible and the real. When others saw a hopeless case, Eliza saw a human being worth saving. And when Sebastian finally opened his eyes, he saw the one person who had never looked away. From that first simple bath to the moment she said yes, Eliza showed us all that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the smallest gestures, a soft cloth on tired skin, a quiet story told to someone who can't answer, a heartbeat that listens even when the mind can't. And when Sebastian gave her his heart, it wasn't because she saved his life. It was because she reminded him what life was worth living for. The lesson? True love doesn't arrive in grand declarations or perfect timing. It's born in loyalty, in gentleness, in staying when it's hard. In a world that often values status over sincerity, this story is a reminder that what matters most is who stands by you when everything else falls away. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength of love and the power of not giving up, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts or your own story of unexpected connection. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales that touch the heart, bring hope, and remind us all that even in the darkest times, compassion and love can change everything. As Sebastian slowly regained strength, relearning to walk and speak, Eliza never once left his side. Every difficult step, every moment of pain and progress, she stood beside him, not as a nurse, but as someone who believed in him when no one else did. It was in those quiet moments, his hand gripping the parallel bars, her encouraging whispers, the steady presence of her love, that something more powerful than recovery took root. It was trust, it was healing, and it was the beginning of a bond that neither of them had expected, yet couldn't imagine living without. The real miracle wasn't just that Sebastian woke up, it was that he woke up to someone who saw him, not his money, not his name, but the man he truly was. Eliza's loyalty and care reminded him that no amount of wealth or success could ever replace the warmth of human connection. Her presence gave him a reason to fight, to hope, to begin again, not as a CEO, but as a man deeply in love. And the lesson? Life doesn't ask for grand gestures. It asks for presence, for compassion, and for people who show up when it matters most. Sometimes the most profound love stories begin in silence and grow in the moments when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a love or friendship that changed your life in the quietest way? We'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more soul-stirring stories, because every heart deserves to be reminded of the power of love, kindness, and second chances.